Welcome to Punchline Talks, the big interview. My name is Mark Owen, and today my special guest is John Trolan. He's the Chief Executive of the Nelson Trust. Welcome to Punchline Talks, John.
Good afternoon, Mark. Yeah.
Nice to see you. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Can you tell us, please, all about the Nelson Trust?
The Nelson Trust is a charity based in Brimscombe in Stroud. It's been established for about 36, 37 years. It employs about 230 people. And this year we'll forecast an income of around 9 million quid. We work with people with a range of social problems, drugs, alcohol, mental health, domestic abuse, street sex working, troubled families. And we have women's centres in Gloucester, Swindon, Bridgwater, Bristol, Cardiff, Swansea, and in Eastwood Park Women's Centre.
Wow, such a very broad stroke of areas and services that you provide. I mean, how the hell do you keep all, it must be intense.
It's quite intense, but it's very rewarding work. Very lucky to have some fantastic people working for us and some fantastic supporters across all those areas.
Yeah. So how long have you actually worked for the company itself?
I've worked for them for about 25 years this year.
And how did you end up being chief executive?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, Mark. I originally volunteered with the charity to facilitate creative writing workshops there. And while I was there, I got very curious about the work I was doing. And I should say that I'd worked in the other two sectors before. I'd worked in the statutory sector. I'd been a civil servant. I'd worked in the private sector in retail management. I'd also been self-employed. And the first contact with the charity was my first experience of working in the voluntary sector. And it immediately dawned on me how fulfilling this job was, how rewarding it was. It was also very clear that in that environment, you're part of a team. So it hasn't got to, who's going to get the highest sales figures or wherever. It was just very, very fulfilling work. And I haven't kind of developed a curiosity for the work that I was doing. I went and did some training. I did a postgrad diploma in addictions counselling from Bath University. And at that time, as we were developing the program, we were beginning to see more and more people with mental health issues, and we didn't know a lot about mental health. So I went and did a master's degree in mental health studies at King's College in London. Again, tried to use that knowledge and learning to influence the design of the program, and quickly realized I was going to need to get back into management if you're really going to elicit significant change in an organization. So, like I said, although I had previous experience in management, I went back to Ashridge Business School and did some management training there. Then came back to the organization and began to I got really interested in the design and the development of the program. Never had any ambitions for any particular job titles or roles. Just essentially kept following my curiosity. In 2013, the charity lost a big contract. We were part of a Gloucestershire partnership with Together Trust, Independence Trust, and ourselves. And the work we were doing went out to tender. National organisation secured a contract, and that had quite an impact on the organisation. Overnight, we lost about a third of our income. So we went from 3.25 million quid to about a 2.5 million quid turnover. The chief executive at the time had a difference with the board. They fell out, and at that point, the board asked me, would I be interested in stepping into the role on a interim basis, which I did. And after 6 months, I was invited to apply for the job full time, which I did. And following the interview, I was appointed in September 2013 as chief exec.
Well, that must have been a real roller coaster ride then. How did you feel when you lost a big contract? I mean, it must have been devastating.
I mean, what it created was a sense of shock and a sense of insecurity in the organization, because people didn't know, weren't quite sure what was going to happen. And I tend to see all of those experiences as opportunities to kind of grow and learn. And it was, learning, reflecting on what we had done and what we might have done better and what do we need to do different going forward. What I was always really clear about was that the work we were doing, supporting the individuals who we support, was both great and profound, and that we had an amazing talent pool within the organization. So my first job was to stabilize the organization, then oversee the implementation of a new delivery model, which took into account the loss of that income, but also come up with a 5-year strategy, which I did. And then the next part, once I was recruited full time or permanent, the next part of the job was to implement that strategy on behalf of the board. The organization has been very lucky in the boards and the chairs that it has had over the years. I think at that point, the chair, recently retired chair, was Richard Lister, who had been instrumental in making significant changes in the organisation. It has since progressed and developed, and today our chair is a woman called Dame Janet Trotter, who was the Lord Lieutenant. She was worked at Gloucestershire University, oversaw its change in status from college to university as vice chancellor, has chaired numerous kind of NHS boards and that. So when you have people of that caliber supporting you, people with that experience, it makes the job a lot easier, and they are effectively responsible for the governance of the organization. And again, that's something that I've learned over time, is that when you get the governance right, the less likely you are to make mistakes.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I want to ask you about where the income stream comes from, because I was looking at the figures. You sort of helped over it was 3,300 women last night access to treatment from the southwest of Wales. So where do you get all your money from? You said about losing that contract before. Is it donations? Is it government money? Where's it from, John?
I mean, it's quite interesting as a charity, because people just say to us, do you get government money? And it's not like the government just give you money. Yeah. I mean, I wish they did.
Yes,
I have asked them, but they keep saying no. But essentially our income is made up of 80% of it is contract income and 20% of it is fundraising. And
what's contract income? Sorry.
So contract income is where we go out to the market and we compete against other organizations for the right to deliver a contract on behalf of either a government ministry or a local authority or an integrated care board, what used to be the clinical commissioning groups, maybe children's services in the local authority. There's a whole range of contracts that are available that we think we can do. And in those instances, we compete against other organizations. And we are a small organization, and it is not easy competing against, essentially some of them are global corporations like Serco and G4S, and that would often be competitors in some of these contracts. But again, we've got a fine team behind us, and the 20% of our income that's fundraised, that comes in a range of forms as well. So some of it is from foundation trusts, grant-making trusts. Some of it is from the events that we run that you're familiar with, like our shoot and our golf day at Minchinhampton Golf Course. Some of it is kind of local community fundraising efforts. Some of it is one-off donations from individuals, and some of it is small, regular donations from individuals as well. So there's a broad range of of fundraising. And I said we're a small organization. We are, but we're a turnover of 9 million quid. People often ask the question, well, why is my fiver or why is my tenner important? And actually, it's critical, because it's the fundraising that enables us to do the research and development around the programs that we run, and bring that extra bit of quality to what we do. Another important difference I've learned working for a charity rather than the private sector is that we exist to make a difference, not a profit. Yeah. But obviously we have to be commercially savvy, or otherwise we wouldn't survive. Yeah. So we have to be run properly. And it's making that difference that is rather than the profit, I find is what is attractive to people who work in the voluntary sector. Yeah. That's what they get a sense of kind of fulfillment from. That's what they get a sense of purpose from, rather than, say, a bonus or something like that, for, hitting so many sales. And again, the fundraising really enables us to make that difference, because a lot of the contracts we have don't fund the kind of services we offer. So, for example, we would have a creche in all of our women's centres. Yeah. We have no contract that says we will fund the creche or part of the creche. Yeah. We would have access to sharing facilities for women who have multiple unmet needs, very often homeless or in poor accommodation. So access to sharing facilities, access to clothes, access to food, all of that stuff. None of that is in a contract. Yeah. The kind of contracts that we would have would be to do things like reduce the levels of reoffending with certain women. It might be to engage and retain people in treatment for substance misuse issues, or in our residential facilities, ensure that they complete treatment. So we have key performance indicators in all of these contracts that obviously if you don't hit them, you'll either lose the contract or certainly won't be awarded it again. Yeah. But the fundraising enables us to make the key difference. And that's why every pound in that area is very important.
Yeah, and you talked about the research and development side of things. What did you actually mean by that? What sort of courses and what are you, how much of the fundraising goes into that? Well, what is it, first of all?
Well, if we look at how the organisation has developed and what it does now, and what it didn't do then when it started, like any other organisation or business, that's grown, it has a track record and a history of responding to two things. The first is service user feedback. Yeah. So by talking to the clients we support, we're asking them, what are we doing well here? What can we do better? Yeah. And it's lovely to hear, oh, you're doing great. This is brilliant. But really, we're interested in, where could we improve? And alongside service user feedback, we would pay attention to the latest research and evidence that's been published in the usual places about what works. Yeah. So an example of that would be around the late 90s, some big research came out in the UK that said you needed, for drug and alcohol treatment to be effective, you needed three things. The first one was you needed a model that you were working towards. The second thing was called the therapeutic alliance, and that's essentially the relationship between a key worker and a client. And the third one was a planned completion. So the evidence was saying if somebody came into your treatment and they complete the treatment successfully, a 5-year follow-up, they will be doing well. Yeah. Now think about that. That's as applicable to antibiotics. You go to your doctor, he says to you, make sure you finish the course. After a few days, you think, I'm feeling grand, I don't have to take them now. So you stop taking them. A week later, you're worse than you were, the week before it. Yeah. Because you didn't finish it. Yeah. Very similar principle applies in treatment. So we had a look at how we were performing in those areas. Yeah. And we were very satisfied, more than satisfied with our model, more than satisfied with our staff and the work that we were doing. But we discovered that we had a cohort of women who weren't completing treatment. And in order to find out why, we had a closer look at these women. And what we discovered was that they shared a number of common characteristics. And those characteristics were they tended to have been traumatized as children, usually sexually abused. They often had children themselves, either in the care of the state or their families. They had mental health problems, frequent experiences of domestic abuse problems. They obviously had substance misuse problems. That's why they were with us. And if they were drug addicts, they often street sex work to fund their addiction. And not every woman had every one of those issues, but all of the women had most of them. Yeah. And what we determined at the time, through a combination of research and experience of staff, was that the trauma was a significant feature of their life experience. Yeah. But we also knew we couldn't address it in a mixed gender environment. So what we did was we set up a women's only unit, and in that unit we began to get better completion outcomes than we were from the mixed gender one. Yeah. So that's the research informing us what we're doing. Well, it was on the back of those residential units that we were invited by the Ministry of Justice to do the community work that we now do from women's centres around the southwest and in Eastwood Park Prison.
Wow. I mean, it's such a complicated thing as well. I mean, surely the problem is getting bigger as well. It's not let's be honest, as with the cost of living crisis, with people losing their jobs, it's more difficult than anything else before. Substance abuse, it must be horrendous trying to deal with so much.
That's another reason why the fundraising is important, because what happens, and particularly in terms of economic downturn, yeah, is these social problems, they kind of emerge or float to the top, and they become much more apparent. And the more stress that you put on families, the more likely you are to find things like domestic abuse. Yeah. The more likely you are to find things like mental health problems. The more likely people will kind of reach for drugs or alcohol to help them cope with some of the stresses that they're facing. And the ironic thing is, as that's happening, less funding is becoming available. Yeah. So the less funding that there is, and the more demand there is for our services, it makes it a bit challenging. But and again, that's where the fundraising that we do is such a critical element, because it enables us to respond to the needs of people. I mean, it sounds challenging, and it is challenging. It sounds complex, and it is complex, and that's why it's professional to work in Nelson Trust and run Nelson Trust. They're alongside all of the other characteristics that I mentioned earlier. They're people who are flexible, agile, responsive, driven, and passionate about the work that they do. And we get to see the benefits of that in Gloucestershire. Yeah, we get to see the difference in all the areas that we work, but we get to see the difference that it makes to people's lives. Yeah. And our role, if you like, and particularly in the community work that we do, is to try and disrupt what are often intergenerational cycles of trauma, abuse, and neglect. Yeah. And when we can do that, and we can see individuals or families kind of, exiting on another path where they will become people who are living independent, meaningful lives, that and making a positive contribution to society. It's amazing. It's like you're looking at miracles every day when you see this happening, and I'm not religious or anything. I don't mean it in a religious sense. I mean it in a, you kind of look on the one hand, see a state an individual can find themselves in, and then after some support and a bit of work with Nelson Trust, you see how they've completely turned that around. I mean, you just never get tired of it. Yeah.
It must be so rewarding on a continual basis, seeing those people. One thing I do know about the charity sector, especially here in Gloucestershire, there's sort of like 5,000 individual charities.
Yeah.
I mean, you are competing on a mass scale. Some obviously the more popular than others, some are bigger than others. How do you make sure that you're constantly there in the news? How do you make sure that you get your fair share of a slimming pie, shall we say?
Well, it is difficult because it's not exactly the most popular cause. Yeah.
It's not sexy, is it? Let's be honest. You don't mind me saying.
Yeah. Yeah. If I stand outside Stroud Station with a bucket saying help a crack addict, yeah, it's not going to put much money into it. Yeah. But I think what again, where we've been very lucky with, and this was because of people like Richard Lisser, actually, put a group of people, a group of friends and supporters around the trust. He gave them a good insight into what was happening in the organization. And I think when people see it and they get it, they know the difference that they're making. Yeah. And it can be simple things like the evidence. Again, this is why the evidence is so important. So you have things like research into adverse childhood experiences. Yeah. So if a kid, if his parents in the criminal justice system, if they have mental health problems, if they have substance misuse problems, if the child witnesses domestic abuse, if he's abused themselves in some way, 1,800 times more likely to become an injecting heroin user.
Wow.
Yeah. And occasionally you will see the newspaper headlines. This child is being beaten up. This child is being murdered. This child nearly died. Da, 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 da. And the sympathy of the country is like, this is terrible. Look what's happened to that child. Yeah. 18 years later, when they're a pain in the arse heroin addict running around shoplifting, everybody has forgotten that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like somewhere on that journey. Yeah. We go as a society from the poor child, yeah, to lock him up. Yeah. That's the only thing that's going to stop it. Yeah. And so I suppose what I'm saying is that when people get an insight into that, see what's happening behind it, see how you can change that. Yeah. They support us. And in Gloucestershire, I'm so grateful for the people who support us because they support us year in, year out. Yeah. We have a fundraising committee who put on the events at Berkeley Castle and the golf day at the shoot at Berkeley, the golf day at Minch, a couple of garden days. The same in the other areas. We're recruiting more and more supporters to do that with us. That really makes a difference. We get committed friends and supporters who really want us to succeed. And the other thing that does is it's a real boost to the morale of the staff. Because if if you're doing this really difficult job, it's made a little bit easier by knowing who it is that's supporting you. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a terrible thing that we have to compete as charities. And that's something that's kind of changed over the last 15 years. We used to kind of share as much as we could. But now when you're going for the same contracts, it is competitive, but that's the way the world these days. Yeah,
it's the nature of the beast, isn't it? But I've got to ask you, John, where you're from originally, because obviously you're not from here in Gloucester, so you're obviously an Irishman.
Obviously an Irishman. Yeah,
I got that bit right.
Yeah. Yeah, I could have been really offended. You could have called me something else there, but
as a fellow Celt, we're okay. So so where are you from originally in Ireland?
Originally from Dublin, and I moved to London in the early to mid 80s. Economic migrant. Better kind of chances there. I loved London. Had a good time there. But when I got to late 20s, early 30s, I just kind of London was very kind of competitive, very kind of fast, very aggressive. And I kind of thought at that time of my life, I want to reevaluate who I am, what I'm doing. And I went back to university as a mature student and moved down to Bristol. Then
how old are you? Sorry, John. How old were you then when you did that?
About 30.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Quite a mature student. And
yeah. I was a mature student when I went back to I did a bachelor's degree then before I did the MSc and the postgrad. But moved to Bristol, and Bristol was like a little bit of a village. Having grown up in Dublin and lived in London. It was quite a culture shock that the shops closed at 10 o'clock at night, you know what I mean, and all that kind of stuff. But I did quite like it. It was a very unique town with two universities and an art college, and it emptied in the summer. Students went. Yeah, you had this big city. There was nobody in it. It doesn't get a lot of tourists, and I did like it. But my wife always wanted to move down here. Yeah. And I was really reluctant because of that city upbringing. If I was thinking Bristol is a village, and we live in Nailsworth now, I was thinking, what's it going to be like here? You know what I mean? But as soon as I got here, I loved it, for all kind of reasons. It was probably the right time in my life. I love living here now. Yeah,
it's funny, isn't it? Gloucestershire seems to get under your skin. It seems that a lot of people that live here have travelled here, came here from family like myself. and then we just love it. And
Yeah, yeah,
we're very blessed, especially
yeah.
the business community as well. We're very fortunate, aren't we, that the
Yeah, I
business
mean
community.
the landscape, the people, people are really friendly and all that. I mean, I just kind of um it's the thing about England that I love being a Irish person is it's a country that's given me a lot of chances, to it really has a respect, I think, for hard work. If you work, you're held in very high esteem. It doesn't matter where you come from. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whether you're local or not. And it's also I find English people very fair in that regard. Yeah. So no, I really, despite 800 years of history, Mark, you know what I mean? I kind of love it here, and I'm, proud to be part of it. I
well,
mean, another thing I should say, actually, that I didn't mention earlier, what used to astonish me about working in Gloucestershire was we used to get invited to the United States every year to speak at conferences there, symposiums. One was in Cape Cod and one was on the West Coast in Palm Springs, about the work that we were doing in Brimscombe.
wow, wow.
It was extraordinary, wasn't it? And I was thinking, there isn't that many people in England interested in what we're doing. And we did that for about 10 or 12 years. And I only stopped because I just got too busy in work. Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
I
yeah,
mean,
it was
there's a terrible, terrible, terrible problem in America with is it Ketylene? What's the problem?
ketamine. No, their biggest problems most recently have been opioid medication,
Yeah,
OxyContin.
that's it.
But you got to kind of grip on that. The criminals kind of replaced it with street drugs that includes fentanyl.
Yes,
So you're
fentanyl. That's
seeing,
right.
yeah, you're seeing anywhere between 70 and 100,000 deaths a year associated with those drugs. I mean, 100,000. Yeah.
Yes. Are we seeing it? Are we seeing that over here at all?
We're beginning to see more of it over here. An increasing use of fentanyl, it tends to be kind of local in the extent that now and again you'll hear something like, "Oh, there's been 8 deaths in Middlesbrough or something like that, and 6 deaths in Blackpool, and half a dozen deaths in Bristol or something." And it seems like these drugs come in batches, and kill people before the police can really get a handle on where they're coming from and stop them. And I think we will see more of them. Kind of oddly, but since the Taliban have come to power in Afghanistan, 80% of all crops produced there before they came back was poppy, for to manufacture heroin. And that has reduced now to 50%. Yeah. So in the next year or 18 months, you're going to see a reduction in the availability of heroin, and that will be replaced by synthetic drugs that are either manufactured in China or manufactured from chemicals that are produced in China and Mexico and that. And they're much more dangerous. Nobody knows what's in them. Yeah, you'll see an increase in risk and harm associated with those drugs manifesting themselves.
Yeah, and along comes with it is crime. Well, on that side, we're kind of running out of time already. Would you believe, John? So I'm going to ask you a couple of personal questions. So, what book are you reading at the moment? Are you reading? Do you like fiction? Do you like non-fiction? The book by the side of your bed. What is it?
The book by the side of my bed, I can't remember the name of it, and I've just finished one by the same author. Oh, sorry, the Beast thing. I've just finished one by the same author ccalled Skippy Dies. Yeah, uh,
Skippy dies.
Skippy Dies.
Yes.
Dies. Yeah. Uh, I and the author's name I think is Paul Murray, and the next book is The Bee Sting, which I'm reading, also by Paul Murray, and I just bought a book the other day, ready to replace it, called Kala, Kala, yeah, by an author called Colin Walsh, I think, and then simultaneously I'll have a few factual books by the side of the bed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. My wife will testify to this because she's always telling me to either read them or clean them up or something like that, that I can dip in and out of. I quite like history books. So I'm often, I think I have, at the moment, I have Anthony Beevor's Second World War, dipping back into that. I was reading a biography of the English British Prime Ministers written by Peter Hennessy, and I didn't realize that he was local.
Right,
He
right.
had originally, this great English constitutional historian comes from Nimsfield.
Wow, wow. You ought to
Yeah.
give you ought to give him a call up.
Well, you
That's
should you should interview him.
well,
Yeah.
maybe I should. Maybe I
Uh,
should. Anyway, John, we're kind of running out of time. I've got to ask you, what's your top three business tips, please? So,
now I was expecting this, and I want to remind you of something. We are not a business; we're a charity.
well,
Yeah.
okay.
So what's very important is that we exist to make a difference, and so I'm talking about tips in that context. Yeah. And I would say the top three is to know where you're going or want to get to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure you have the right people around you.
Is that one?
No, know where you're going is one. Have
Yeah.
the right people around you is two. Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't give up is three. Persist.
I thought you'd forgotten that first. And
No, no.
persist is your number three.
Persist. Yeah. You have to keep think like I was talking about our experience in 2013. Yeah. Some organizations would have went under at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you know where you're going, if you know where you want to get to, yeah, then it's a little bit easier to keep going when times get tough and not to walk away from it. But you can't do anything in this life on your own. And no matter how successful individuals are as personalities or wherever, none of them would have achieved the thing on their own. You need the right people around you. And at Nelson Trust, we're so fortunate with the staff that we have working with us and the supporters who we have locally supporting the organisation. Yeah. And none of our success as an organisation would have happened without them.
Well, John, I couldn't agree with you more. That's all we've got time for today. Thanks ever so much for joining Punchline Talks, John Trolan. Thanks very
Happy to
much.
talk to you. Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Bye.